Well, we are very, very honoured to have Lionel Friedberg with us. Lionel comes to us with an incredible background as a film producer extraordinaire. You've produced films for the Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, PBS, the History Channel, National Geographic. He has 18 credits as director of photography on feature motion pictures, and he's worked all over the world on dramatic and non-fiction productions. He was born in South Africa and worked in Zambia, directed numerous TV episodes and single dramas and documentaries in South Africa, and was chairman of the South African Film and Television Association for many years. And he's been in the United States since 1986. For the past 30 years, he specialized in fiction and non-fiction series, episodes and single shows, as well as writing non-fiction books. And he's here today to tell us about his latest book, which is absolutely amazing. I'm going to hand over to Lionel to talk about his journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me on your show. And it's marvelous to be in the company of all of these people from all over the world. So I feel very grateful to be here. Welcome this opportunity to tell you a little bit about my own background. I have been fascinated by, call it the paranormal if you like, but anything outside of the ordinary has fascinated me ever since I was a child. And I've had the good fortune of making a lot of films about some really interesting subjects during my 50-odd years as a filmmaker. I now basically spend most of my time driving a word processor behind a desk, although I'm still involved in the film industry. But, you know, to cut things short and to get straight to the chase is, I grew up in South Africa and I was an only child. When I was growing up, of course, South Africa was in the grip of that awful divisive racist system known as apartheid, which everyone is familiar with that concept and that name, that word. And even though I was very, very young, one was very conscious of the fact that something was not entirely right about the society in which we lived. And I'll tell you and give you an example. Because I was an only child, both of my parents worked. So we were privileged whites, and we all had nannies at home. And so there was always a wonderful black lady who looked after me as a child. And when I was about maybe 5 or 6 years old, I was living in a very small town just to the east of Johannesburg, where that town is. The town is called Kempton Park. That's where the big international airport is today. One day she took me for a walk down the road, and as we were walking down the street from the house where I lived, a police van arrived, and because there was a black person walking on the other side of the road, and the vans came to a screeching halt. And the cops jumped out of the van and went to ask this black man who was walking, for his papers. And I said to my nanny, I said, "What do they want?" And she said, "Don't talk. Let's just go away." And I said, "No, but what do they want with that man?" Anyway, they roughed him up. They were very, very discourteous towards him, very rude. And apparently whatever they wanted, he didn't have. What he didn't have on him, of course, were the correct papers for him to be legally in that area. Anyway, they threw him in the back of the van and drove off in a cloud of dust. And I thought, gosh, what was that all about? I asked my nanny to explain it to me, but she was very nervous to talk about it. So that night I said to my parents, what could that have been about? And my parents said, be very, very careful about things like that. Don't ask questions like that. Just don't even go there. So I knew instinctively when I was very, very young that something was wrong about the society in which I was living. Now, a couple of years later, it was the same nanny, and it was her day off. And as I said to you earlier, both my folks worked, and so she said to me, "I've got a day off today." I was home from school, and she said, "I'm going to visit a friend." Thursday afternoons was the servant's day off, and so she said, "I'm going down the road to see a friend of mine. Do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone because she had to look after me." So we went down the road, and we went into the garden of another house, very similar to ours. And at the back end, the backyard, was a little tiny room, just like all the other houses, including ours. And that was the servants' quarters. And when we got there, the door was closed, and she knocked on the door, and her friend came to the door and said something to her in, I think it was Zulu, the language they were speaking. And so my nanny came back and said, she's seeing someone at the moment. She won't be long, and then we'll go inside. And I said, so, you know, is it a friend? And she said, no, she's seeing a patient. And I said, a patient? Why? What does that mean? And my nanny said to me, well, you know, she is a kind of doctor. And I thought, what on earth is she referring to? What does she mean by a kind of doctor? Anyway, about 10 minutes later, the door opened, and whoever the person was, her guest came out, carrying a little paper bag with something inside it, and left. And then we went inside her room. And when I went inside there, I smelt things that I'd never smelt before. I saw in the shadowy area of her room, there was a little tiny window. There were containers holding all sorts of weird things, bulbs and roots and berries and feathers. There were even animal skins hanging on the walls. And I thought, what on earth is all this about? And I asked her, I said, what are these things? And so she said to me, well, I am a sangoma. And I've never heard the word before. And then she said, what a sangoma is, it's a kind of doctor. I can see people and I can help them because I call upon my ancestors to help me in my work. And all this sounded like it was straight out of an adventure novel for me. I had no idea what she was referring to. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'll show you what I mean. And she showed me a little grass mat on the floor of her room. And she said, you see that little bag over there? And there was a little animal skin bag. And I said, yes. She said, turn it upside down, which I did. And all these bones, little bones and trinkets fell out of it. And she said, those are the things that I use in order to diagnose what is wrong with people. And I thought, wow, that's, it sounds like straight out of an adventure story. Anyway, we didn't go into details, but that was impregnated indelibly in my mind. The whole thing was, like a straight out of a Saturday afternoon serial that I used to see at the movies, in darkest Africa. And I'd never forgotten that. And years and years and years later, I'm jumping ahead now, but I'd like you to remember what I've just told you about the little grass mat and that little woman in her little room. Many, many years later, I had finished my high school, and I was on the verge of looking for a college or even university to go to when my father decided it was time to leave South Africa. And I'm talking about 1960 now. He'd had enough of apartheid. My father was originally from Latvia, and he found the whole apartheid system pretty abhorrent. My mother was born in South Africa, so she was a little more tolerant of the system. But my father decided it was time to leave the country. And so he took a job. He had trained back in Latvia as a watchmaker in the days when people wore mechanical watches. He fixed little watches with springs and coils and whatever else. And so he took a job as a watchmaker and a manager of a new little jewelry and watchmaking shop in a mining town, a copper mining town, way up at the top of northern Rhodesia, which is in the middle of Central Africa, slap bang against the border of the Congo. The Belgian Congo had just become the new independent Republic of the Congo, and war had broken out there, and chaos was ruling supreme. Nevertheless, my father took a job right on the verge of the Congo, on the copper belt of northern Rhodesia. And everyone said, are you crazy? There's a war going on there. And my father said, northern Rhodesia is peaceful and quiet. It's a British colony. There's no war over there. That's going on the other side of the border. And he decided to leave. And when my parents decided to leave the country, I said, I want to come with you. And my mother said, you're not. You've got to go to university. But my dream was always to make movies, always. And ever since I was 11 years old, I'd been making films for my school, for my friends, birthday parties, sporting events, our debating society at school, whatever else. That was my dream. I wanted to make movies. And when they decided to go to Central Africa, I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity for me, because now I can go up there and make my own version of King Solomon's Mines and The African Queen and all those wonderful films that I adored so much every Saturday afternoon at the local cinema. how naive could you possibly have been? How did I even expect that to happen? But I insisted on going with them, and I did. And when I got up there, I was absolutely mortified because there were only copper mines, tiny towns, and nothing else, and bush and jungle from horizon to horizon. I thought, what have I done? Nevertheless, one day in the local newspaper, after about 3 months, there was an ad for staff for a new television station. A British company had decided to open up a television station in the town of Kitwe, which is in the middle of the copper belt, in order to entertain the white miners at night. But during the day, the plan was to show educational broadcasts for black school children in the areas, because there was a shortage of teachers. And in the afternoon, cultural programming for adult, tribal members of the various tribes in the area, the biggest one being the Bemba tribal group. So anyway, this television station was being built. And when I learned this, when I saw this in the newspaper, I went rushing to the door, knocked at the door, and I said, "You've got to give me a job. I've got to work for you." And the manager who was running the station was an ex-British army colonel. And he was quite tolerant of me, and he sort of listened to me, and he said, "You're quite audacious, but you sound pretty keen. All of our staff are coming out from the UK, and I don't have anything really to offer you, but I can offer you a menial job if it's available." And I said, "Yes, anything. I'd sweep the floor, whatever you've got." And fortunately, like manna from heaven, I was offered a job at this television station in the props department. Well, it didn't take me long after I joined the station to be in the props department. I begged the manager to allow me an opportunity to get behind one of those studio cameras. And he said, "All right, we'll try you. You're young, but we'll give you a chance. You can work on one of the educational broadcasts in the morning. You can't go too wrong. All you have to do is hold the presenter in your shot and don't wobble the camera. And if you're any good, we'll think about it." Well, because I'd been making films since I was 11 years old, I knew how to compose a shot very, very quickly. And it worked in my favor, because it wasn't too long when they decided, "All right, I'll get a job as a cameraman." And that's how I began my career at this little tiny television station, the very, very first one in Central Africa. Educational broadcast in the morning, cultural programming in the afternoon, where tribal groups would arrive in trucks with drums and grass skirts and rattles and beads, and dance and drum and so on in the studio. And at night, we would have the latest programming from Europe, from England and America for the white community. So I lived in this multicultural world. That's how my career began. And it wasn't long after all this was happening that Britain was giving up all its colonies in Africa, and Northern Rhodesia was notified that, yes, it was going to be given its independence. Northern Rhodesia was about to become the independent Republic of Zambia. And in 1964, that came about. And when that happened, all of us, the white staff at the station, we got little pink slips to say, "Thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job, but we give you 6 months. You've all got to be out of the station. We are going to, all the jobs that are occupied by white people at the moment are going to be given to local Zambian citizens, blacks," which we totally understood. I had no gripe with that, neither did anyone else. Independence was coming, sounded like the right thing to do. But my problem was, what was I going to do with my life? How was I going to continue to do what I was loving doing so much? My dream was eventually to get to Hollywood, but how would that happen? So I went home in a very morbid state of mind, and we had a very, very nice young man who worked for us, a black guy by the name of Kevin Mshlangu. And I said to him the next morning, I said to him, "I was fired yesterday. I'm going to have to leave the station." He said, "Oh, no, that's terrible." And I said, "But my problem is I don't know what to do. I don't want to go back to South Africa, where there was a film industry. I could have gone there. And I didn't quite know what to do. I was in a quandary." So I said this, I told this our servant that, and he said, "Don't worry about it. I will find someone to help you decide what to do with your life." And I said, all right, but I had no idea what he had in mind or what the solution was. And then about a week later, there he was, he and I, in my little beat-up VW Beetle, going on a little dirt track through the bush. Kevin was directing me, and we got to a little tiny village. And at the outskirts of this little village was a single mud hut, all on its own, under a baobab tree. And he said to me, this is the place. Here is the lady who will tell you what you are going to do with your life. I had complete trust in the guy, but I had no idea what he had in mind, or what the day would bring, or what this little old lady was going to tell me. You know, but I was in such a state of mind that I was prepared to expose myself to anything. Anyway, he knocked at the door, and this little old woman opened the door and invited us into her little mud hut. And she said, sit down. And as soon as I went into that hut, the smells that I remember from it, my childhood, back in South Africa, all those years ago, when I was introduced to that so-called herbalist, the Sangoma, the same smells. I smelt the same things. And on shelves around the room in this little old lady's house were similar little boxes and trinkets and containers holding similar roots and berries and barks and powders that I'd seen as a child. So I knew, she must be some kind of a healer, herbalist, doctor, whatever, that I had remembered back from my childhood days. Now, she spoke no English. She was speaking Bemba, and she said to me, sit down, and which we did. I sat on the floor. And there on the floor was a grass mat, just like I'd seen as a child, 10 or 15 years earlier. And she said, pick up a little bag, which I did. And she said, shake it, and then open it up and say your name into the bag, which I did. And then she said, turn the bag upside down, which I did. And out poured these little bones, the size of little chicken bones, and little knuckles and things, and little marbles and stones and other little trinkets that she'd collected, including even a few bottle tops. And I knew that these were the same things that this other woman that I'd seen use as a child. But what on earth was she going to do with them? Anyway, she leaned forward and she looked down at these bones and little objects lying on the grass mat. And she started to babble nonstop, as though she was reading a book. And Kevin, the man sitting next to me, was trying his best to keep up with her, to translate what she was telling me. And the extraordinary thing was that over the next hour, she basically told me what my life would be, what would happen to me over the next 50 years. Because every single thing that little old lady told me in her mud hut in Africa all those years ago, every single thing has come to pass, including my marriages, how many children I would have, where I would travel. Every single thing she foresaw in those bones that afternoon. And she told me some amazing things. For example, one of the things she said to me, and none of it made sense, by the way, none of it at all. She said, don't worry, your work will take you to many places. So one day, it will take you to a world where there is no color. The whole place there's no color in this place at all. It is all white. You will go there for your work. It is a very, very strange place. She was obviously seeing things in those bones lying on this little grass mat that I certainly wasn't seeing, in other words, Kevin, but she was seeing things, and she was merely describing to me what she was seeing. I filed that thought away. She said to me, another thing she said to me was, be very, very careful, because one day you are going to meet the man who was the closest friend of the most evil man who ever lived. And I thought, my God, what is she telling me? What does all this mean? None of it made any sense to me at all. Again, I filed it away. But the most encouraging thing, and the thing that made some sense to me, was she said, you are going to cross the great water to another part of the world. And there you are going to continue to do the kind of work that you're doing now. That was the only thing that made any sense to me. I read that as being, I'm probably going to emigrate somewhere. And she was right, because what I did was about 2 or 3 weeks after that, I went back to South Africa. I had no option. I had to go back, and I worked in the film industry for a while, and then I immigrated to North America. I immigrated to Canada, and it was only when I was on the ship one night I saw the Southern Cross in the skies, getting lower and lower and lower on the horizon at night. And I felt as though I was moving from one hemisphere to the other, from south to north. And then it hit me. That's what that woman saw. I'm going to cross the great water to the north, to another part of the world. She foresaw that as well. So everything that this little old lady, and she'd probably never been more than about 10 miles away from this place where I met her. You know, she probably grew up there. What did she know about the oceans? Zambia, you know, northern Rhodesia, Zambia is a landlocked country. She'd never seen the ocean. But she foresaw all these things. And I'm just going to throw a couple of other examples of how incredibly accurate this woman was in what she told me. When she described that white world, you know, again, as I said to you, I filed that away in my memory banks. And in 1991, I was working here in the United States, and I was making a documentary film for PBS, which is the public broadcasting system here. And it was for a science series called The Infinite Voyage. And it was a show based on climate change and how do you measure climate and global change. The one way to do this is to go to Antarctica, where there is no populations, no cities, but are these oceans getting more acidic? Is the ozone hole getting any bigger? Is carbon dioxide going up in the atmosphere? The place to measure those things is to go to where there are no big cities, and you go to Antarctica to measure those things. And that's what we did. So I was with a science crew from the National Academy of Sciences here in the United States. And we were down there, and it was Christmas Eve, 1991. And the captain of this icebreaker that we were working on, this research ship, he stopped the ship. We were in the middle of this ice field. And he said, we're going to have a party tonight. And they had a little Christmas tree on board in the ship. And everybody got very happy and, you know, were partying away and drinking it. But I decided to go up on the deck and write up my notes. And while I was up there, and it was December. So the sun never set. It was 24 hours of daylight, but it was midnight was kind of like a twilight environment. The sun was sitting on the horizon, but didn't set, and then came up again. And I was looking around me, and I was thinking, how am I ever going to describe this place to the audience when I write the narration for the show? And I said to myself, it's like being in a world without color. It's like being in a white world. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, all those years ago, that's what this little old lady foresaw. She described precisely what I was feeling that very moment as I was trying to describe what I was seeing around me. A world without, like was being inside a translucent egg, a world without color, a world entirely white. She saw that. And I realized once again, it happened many, many times, of how accurate this amazing woman was. In terms of the evil man that she said to me, I will one day meet a man who knew the most evil man who ever lived. In 1983, this is just before I moved to the United States, I was working on a series of films about the history of aviation in Southern Africa. And the story of South African Airways was an interesting one because in 1936, they bought new aircraft from Germany. And those aircraft had to be flown all the way from the factory in Germany to South Africa. Now, in 1936, doing something like that was a big deal. There were no airports, there were no meteorological stations along the way. Communication was very, very sparse. And so it was a major thing to be able to do that in a fairly small aircraft that only held about 20 people. So I discovered in doing the research for that show and the delivery flight of those aircraft that one of the pilots was still alive. And when I discovered that, I said to my research team, I said, we've got to find the guy. We've got to nail him. We've got to do an interview with him. Is he able to speak? And we found out that he was about 89 years of age, living in a very, very small town near Munich. And he agreed, we got permission through the Foreign Office of the German government to meet the guy and to interview him. And he would give me an interview about that delivery flight in 1936. And I was thrilled about that. So when I went to meet him with our crew, when we were filming in Germany in 1983, you know, I met this guy, and the night before we actually went to his house, we had a deputation from the Foreign Office with us, they facilitated the interview. And the man from the Foreign Office, from the German government, said, "How much do you really know about this guy that you're going to interview tomorrow? You know about the fact that he delivered that aircraft to South Africa in 1936, but do you know what else he did?" And I said, "No, why? What else is there to know?" And the man said to me, "Well, obviously, you know, he survived the war, so he fought in the war." And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And I said, "Why? Is that an important factor? Do you want me to deal with that?" And the man said, "Absolutely, under no circumstances are you to discuss the war with him at all. He's served in the Luftwaffe, but please do not discuss the war." I said, "All right, I won't do that. That's not the purpose of the interview anyway." And he was kind of nervous about me meeting him and he sort of leant forward and he said, "I have to tell you something before you meet him tomorrow. Because the truth of the matter is that this guy that you're meeting tomorrow used to be Adolf Hitler's personal pilot during the war." And I thought, oh, my goodness, it's not very often that you get an opportunity to interview somebody like that. How am I going to deal with that? Adolf Hitler's personal pilot, this is going to be interesting. Nevertheless, the next day I met the guy and we set up, we had a crew of about 5 or 6 people, plus the photographic crew, plus the deputation from the Foreign Office. And the man spoke no English. The pilot spoke no English at all, only German. And we did the interview. I asked the questions in English. The man from the Foreign Office asked the questions and translated. He answered in German. When we put the film together, I was going to caption. We put captions on the bottom of the screen in English. And the interview was excellent, and he told us all about that flight and all the adventures flying down Africa in 1936 and how incredible it was. And, you know, often their lives were in danger, and there was almost a crash landing in what is today Zimbabwe along the way, and all sorts of wonderful stories. And when the interview was done, I said, you know, "Thank you very much, Dankeschön, very much." And he said he was relieved, this pilot, his name was Hans Bauer, B-A-U-R. And when the interview was over, he was kind of relieved. And then he said to me in German, he said, "Das ist fertig? Are we finished?" And I said, "Yes." And he said to his wife, "Bring on the schnapps, bring on the drinks." So his wife went away and came back with a big tray of drinks. And we poured some schnapps and a bit of good German beer and some nice Rhine wine. And then he said to me, "Herr Friedberg, I want to show you something in German." And I got up with him, and we hobbled to a corner of the side of the living room where there was a little private bathroom, a little toilet area there. And on the wall was a photograph of him standing in front of one of the aircraft that we've been speaking about in the interview. And with him in the shot was Adolf Hitler. He was in his uniform, and Hitler also was standing there looking very, very official and officious. And he said to me, "Do you want to know about this picture?" And I said, "You know, do you want to know?" And I said, "Yes." And he called his wife. He told her to bring the photograph albums out, which she did. And for the next 3 hours, he and I sat on his couch, and he opened these albums, and he showed me basically the inner workings of the Third Reich. He was so close to Hitler. He and Adolf Hitler were friends since boys. When he married his first wife, Adolf Hitler gave him his wedding party in his private apartment, Hitler's apartment. And all of these images and these pictures in these photograph albums were Hitler and Himmler and Goering and you name them, all of the inner rankings of the Third Reich in this photograph album. And I thought, my God, you know. And when it was all over, I said to the crew, let's pack up, wind up the cables, and off we go. It was a fascinating afternoon, but I was kind of disturbed about the fact that, you know, here I was sitting next to a guy who was very, very close to Hitler, who was responsible for the death of, 20 million people in his life. And as we drove away, I looked out the back of the van that we were traveling in, and there he was waving goodbye to me. And it was only then that it hit me in full force that you realize that this man was closer than perhaps anyone else to one of the most evil men in history. And it hit me again that this is what that little old lady in her mud hat had foreseen. She said, you will meet a man who knew the most evil man who ever lived. And it was extraordinary when I suddenly realized, how on earth could that woman have known that? How could she possibly have foreseen that and described him the way she did? But she did. And she went on and she had told me many, many other things. She even told me about, I'm backtracking again, but to the little meeting in the mud hut, another thing she told me was that my life one day will almost be lost to what she called was a great beast in the bush. I will almost die from a great beast. And that came to pass as well, because I was almost trampled to death by an elephant in the bush when I was filming a safari for an American company in Mozambique in 1967. Everything, she foresaw all of this. So to cut a long story short, about this little old lady in her mud hut in Africa, I thought the most extraordinary thing was, here is a woman who actually had no experience of the world whatsoever, and yet she was capable of foreseeing and foretelling all of these extraordinary things with such incredible accuracy. How is it possible? In 1996, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening kidney condition. I had an autoimmune disorder and my kidneys were failing. And I went to see one of the best nephrologists here in Los Angeles. And he said, you know, within 10 years, you are either going to be on dialysis or this is going to take your life because your kidneys are pretty, seriously bad. And I was horrified to hear this. And I have a friend who lives not terribly far from where I live here in Los Angeles. About an hour away is a place called Santa Barbara, which is where my friend lived. And he's a general surgeon. And I called him up and I told him, I said, Dave, I've been diagnosed with this horrible kidney disease. What do you think I can do about it? Now, here's the interesting thing. This friend of mine, who is the surgeon, is my age. He also grew up in South Africa. And he was fascinated by the fact that sangomas, the traditional healers of Africa, are able to heal their clients, their patients, by going out into the bush and picking leaves and berries and little things and mixing these little concoctions together. And the stuff works. It heals people. And he was fascinated by this. Now, this is a guy who grew up in the world of allopathic Western medicine. He studied, he lectured at Stanford University after he arrived in this country from South Africa. Now he's in private practice in Santa Barbara as a surgeon. And he was fascinated by the healers of South Africa. So he was going back, studying their methods of medicine. How is it possible that they can identify various plants and berries and so on that heal people without having gone to medical school for 7 years? So that's what he was all about. And when I told him about my illness, he said, you know what, Lionel, I am going back to South Africa in October, or a few months away from when I told him the story. I'm going to do another session with my teacher in Swaziland because he's teaching me about the healing properties of plants. Why don't you come with me? And maybe you can meet one of these healers who might be able to help you, because what you're telling me is you're pretty ill. I said, Dave, are you serious? You're a surgeon and you are telling me to go and meet a witch doctor to help me? And he said, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you to do, because they know more than we give them credit for. He said, I want to tell you that as a surgeon and having spent time with those people, what they have learned and what they know is greater than than perhaps even our Western medicine gives them credit for. But certainly, I don't know how much, how come they know as much as they do. I'm fascinated. And I think that you might find some benefit by coming with me and meeting some of these people, because they may have a cure for you. I was stunned when he told me that. And I did go back. And when I went back with him to South Africa on his trip, I met a number of amazing healers, sangomas as they are called, who all diagnosed my illness by throwing the bones and telling me that I've got a kidney condition. And they all gave me various, some of them suggested one thing, some suggested another. But what they were offering me were the options to be healed traditionally with natural substances instead of going the route of big pharma in order to save my life. And I find it absolutely fascinating, because how could they possibly how could they know all this stuff? One of the Sangomas explained to me when I asked what they do, and this probably is of relevance to a number of your viewers and the members of your group. The healer said to me, what we do, the system, the method by which we find the cure for our patients, or to determine what kind of medication they need, is we look at the bones. Why do we look at the bones? Because the bones fall in a certain pattern on the mat. And why do they fall in a certain pattern? Well, it is our belief that the ancestors are making them fall in this certain way. And so my ancestor is interpreting the bones for me and telling me what to tell my patient, how to help him. Because it is the patient's ancestor who speaks to my ancestor. The bones are merely the unifying factor. That's merely the method that we use to connect two worlds, the world of the afterlife and the world of this life, because they have more knowledge and wisdom than we do, and they're able to interpret things that we don't understand, but they tell us. So they are tapping into those who came before them, not only their own ancestors, but wise people and the elders of various tribal groups. They consult those by consulting the bones, and this is how they determine what the cure should be. It is absolutely fascinating. And it sounds like it's out of, some sort of boy's adventure story, but all of the stuff absolutely works. And, I tell you, I experienced things that I had never thought I'd ever see. One of the cures that was offered to me on that particular trip when I went back to South Africa was my friend Dave's, his teacher, who was telling him what to do. He said, "You need a fember." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, think of it as an exorcism. We need to get rid of the dark energy that is plaguing you. It's not about getting rid of devils that are inhabiting your body, because it's not about that. It's dark energy. It is negativity. It's plaguing you. That's what's making you ill. And we know how to do that. And the fember is a process by which we can get rid of it." And it was arranged that I would go and have this process, this ritual done on me in a little village in Mozambique, overlooking the most spectacular view in the world. The mountains overlooking KwaZulu, South Africa on one side, Mozambique on the other, just glorious, up in the clouds, in this hut one night with a bunch of women drumming, and this man who spoke absolutely no English arrived in the hut dressed in animal skins and rattles and a grass skirt and beads, and he changed his being. He basically became another entity. In front of me, I could see him almost becoming an animal. He dropped onto all fours and he walked on his hands and knees across the floor in his hut towards me. And he smelt me all the way from my feet, all the way to my head. But when he got to the kidneys on the side of my body, he physically became ill and vomited this unbelievable slime into a barrel that was being held there by one of his assistants, as though he had taken in to his own body something that was in mine, and regurgitated it into this barrel. I never thought I would ever see anything like that. But after that particular trip and this incident that I've just described, and I've been very brief in my description of what happened that night, I came back to LA. I went back to see my nephrologist for a checkup. He said, "You know what? Your numbers are better. Your kidneys are stable. What happened?" And when I described all this to him, he thought I was absolutely daft. He said, "You telling me that you went to a witch doctor and you better, and mine, compared to what we were doing, the medication that I prescribed for you and the treatment." He said, "You really give that guy credit?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He told me, as I told you earlier, within 10 years, I'll be on dialysis or I'll be dead. Well, that's 30 years ago. And all I've been doing is following natural healing and the natural methods prescribed to me by African healers, the Sangomas of Africa. Those are the people who saved my life. There's absolutely no question about that. So I think the takeaway lesson here for me is we don't really know it all. And some of the wisest and kindest and most insightful people I think I've ever met are those who live in mud huts under thorn trees in the middle of nowhere. You don't have to go to a university or an academic institution in order to learn the secrets of nature and the universe. There are other ways of accessing that kind of knowledge. That's what these people do, and I'm living proof of that. And it's been an unbelievable eye-opener for me, how much more there is to learn from people who live in the middle of nowhere, completely, unknown individuals who are connected to a system that is as mysterious as we don't really understand it. But when I wrote this book, based on my experiences, this is all about my experiences with the shaman. I'm trying to just get it in focus for you. It's called Forever in My Veins. The last one, at the very end of the book, I said, whether you are a person or a pony or a petunia, it doesn't matter who or what you are. But wherever there is life or sentience or consciousness, there is a connection to an unseen, I believe, a grid, a network, if you like, that binds us all together. Of that, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. We can all access that field of hidden knowledge. It's out there if one knows how to go about accessing it and getting it and using it. And for me, it's been absolutely amazing. There is so much more to the world and the cosmos than we know. And I think, that we should all take heart from the fact that a lot of people, particularly today after the pandemic and with COVID and all the rest of it, get pretty depressed. And the world is a depressing place, particularly when you look around what's going on now and the invasion of Ukraine and all these things. And people get, all they're seeing is negativity, and they're seeing, look how sad and how tragic everything is. But I believe that there is hope, and I believe that there is an answer to all of this. If only we access this unifying field that connects us all together, we can solve anything, whether it's a personal illness or whether it's international trials and tribulations. I really do believe that there's hope for all of us